Hello and welcome back to the Shmeemuseum. Now, I always said that this channel would bring you much more into the ownership and behind the scenes of the cars in the garage. And one thing I want to touch on is more to do with what's involved in actually running some of the Shmeemobiles. And today I want to focus on the McLaren 675LT Spider. Now, out of all of the cars here, it might not technically be the oldest, but it is the car that I have owned the longest, having recently passed 5 years, and of course, therefore, having its 5th year service. It's now done just shy of 17,000 miles, but I want to run through the car in a bit of detail, but tell you the specific numbers behind the servicing, the tyres and pads that I've had, the road tax, the insurance, the costs that have been involved basically in using this car as much as I have. It's done a number of different track days, some road trips and tours, a bit of daily driving, and well, 17,000 miles over 5 years. It might not sound a lot compared to normal daily driver cars, but for something like a 1 of 500 675LT Spider, to do, what, 3,500 miles a year is actually quite a lot for this kind of thing. Now, of course, before the Spider, I had the Coupe, again, 1 of 500. I sold that effectively because at the time, the Spider was never going to be released. McLaren decided to release it. I changed up to this car and went with the completely bespoke paint color, MSO Orion Purple, as we called it, the very controversial at the time silver wheels that I chose to keep on it, but the very bright silver with the silver calipers contrasting against the dark metallic purple paint, a combination that I've always really quite liked with it. We've got the 3.8 litre twin turbocharged V8, as the name suggests, 675 metric horsepower, HP or PS over in German, which actually translates to horsepower, which is 666 brake horsepower, slightly different scales. A lot of people get a little bit confused with that. It is a fantastic car. We've seen it many times over the years on the channel. I think that this is where McLaren really hit the nail on the head. The package that evolved from the MP412C through the 650S, where they updated the front and the visual, the new headlights, and then for the 675, when they did the rear of this car, they got it absolutely spot on. It looks brilliant. It drives so well. I think that this will be forever one of the best cars that McLaren will actually make. It's still emotional and evolving, where some of the newer cars don't have that same involvement. They have much more performance for sure, but not the same enjoyment when you drive it. So this is the sweet spot. Now, we should talk a little bit about some of the costs, and fundamentally there was the initial outlay to purchase the car, to spec it up. I think the base price was in the region, I want to say, of £286,000 here in the UK for one of the 500, the limited edition, although I'm sure there are slightly more than that out there in total. Adding in the options, and of course going to MSO to do, for example, the custom paint color, to add all of the visual carbon fiber on the exterior, to give it some of the upgrades inside, like the upgraded sound system, carbon mirrors and vents, and all of those details, came for a total price of this car, as specified, to about £335,000. Now, in addition to that, there was also going to Topaz to do the full paint protection film, the entire car over all of the painted panels, all of the visual carbon fiber everywhere on the exterior has PPF. That was just over £4,000 more. And then, of course, also the tracker system, the global telemetric system, which was about, I think, £750 for the install. So we're talking, as it sits, the car originally build price $340, and I'll talk a little bit later about what it might be worth now, which is sadly quite a lot lower than that. But of course, that was 5 years ago. It's a permanent car and it's not quite so relevant. But I want to touch onto what it's actually cost then. Now, obviously, things like insurance vary dramatically depending who you are, where you are, what you're doing with the car, things like storage as well. For the first 4 years of its life, this car lived in a storage facility. Obviously now it is here at the Shmeemuseum, which is a little bit different. It works out significantly more expensively per car if you just look at this as a storage facility. In fact, probably 3 to 4 times the price per car of what it is to keep them in a storage facility dedicated for supercars. So it's quite hard to really calculate that exactly. And then, of course, things like the tax and that side of it are very different depending on different countries as well and where the car is. Now, this car over its time, In the month I took delivery, I actually took it out to Germany, to the Nürburgring. We went to Fuel Faction Eno, we drove it down through Croatia, to Bosnia, to Montenegro, across to Italy into France. I took it over to Spain to join the McLaren F1 Owners Tour, had a little whoops with the car. Some of you might remember that from, well, literally this month 5 years ago, which is amazing how quickly time has flown. So it's done a lot of different things. It's done many different track days, multiple pure McLaren days. It's been around lots of different race circuits, the Nürburgring, Spa-Francorchamps. We went to a track in the north of Spain, which was great fun as well. So it's obviously gone through a few different sets of tyres in the process. In fact, I've had the regular P0s plus the Trofeo Rs, which are on it now, the more track-focused tyres. And given the majority of the driving it does now is fair weather, we could say, it makes sense to keep it on the Trofeos. But to go through some of these numbers, and I'm going to have to look at my notes because it's all a little bit complicated. We have the servicing, so obviously 5 years, 5 services. It needs an annual service or every 10,000 miles. I've never done 10,000 miles in a single year. It varies a little bit year to year depending what it's needed, but I've spent a total on the 5 services of £4,255. Now that doesn't include the 4th service because McLaren at the time had the car for an extended period thanks to a warranty issue we'll touch on in a moment. They actually covered the 4th service. So that's what I've spent over the 4 that I've paid for. In the time, we've had new front pads. We've had at least 6 sets of rear tyres, plus I think 2 sets of front tyres. And in total, I've spent £4,864 on those, which means I'm a little over £9,000 on the servicing, tyres, pads, general maintenance, you could say, which isn't a load. Obviously, it's quite a significant amount of money, but even to service any Mercedes or a BMW and to do tyres and things like that with a few track outings, you'd be looking at probably pretty similar numbers, to be honest. It wouldn't be that far off. Now moving to the road tax, and here in the UK we have a very complicated system for road tax. In fact, we have a few different systems, and the one that is relevant to your car is the one that was in play when the car was registered. So this was just before the new one, which is weighted towards the beginning and effectively after 8 years becomes 0 per year on a car of this kind of nature. But this one went in when it was about 500 or so pounds a year. It inflates slightly year to year, but the first year is included when you purchase the car. So for this car, with the inflation over the 5 years, of course, including the 6th year that I've already paid, I have spent £2,750 in total on the road tax. Now, one big cost with this has been the warranty. The warranty runs out after 3 years as standard. That's what you get included with it. You can opt to extend it, as I did for the 4th and the 5th year, and if you extend it for 2 years at a time without the warranty having lapsed after 3 years, you get a bit of a discount on it. But for that extension, I paid for 2 years of extra warranty £7,590. Yes, £3,800 or so of warranty per year. Now, when it expired, well, a month or so ago, I was considering should I extend it for the 6th and 7th years, and I decided not to go down the route of self-warrantying, especially because I don't do all that many miles, and ultimately warranty is something that helps you a lot the more that you drive a car. If you use it a lot, it's going to be more effective. Obviously, something big could happen, but 675LTs have proven to be fairly reliable, and I've got a list of all of the warranty claims that I've ever had over the years that I've owned this car, which I find quite interesting as well. There are a few things that sound like they might be quite big, but actually haven't been. One of those was way back in May 2017 when I was on a road trip with the car. You might remember I had a little issue with it that kind of brought the day to an end rather sooner than we had planned. When we were driving on the Red Rock Road, there was basically a thermostat issue, which was just a sensor, but it meant that I had the car trucked back from the south of France, which wasn't ideal, although the truck was actually waiting due to collect the car the next day anyway. So again, not really the worst thing. A month later, there was actually a little hydraulic leak, so that needed to be fixed. That again sounds really bad, but it's just a case of a hose having come off, so that was sorted out. I had a tail light replaced as well. This is something that many supercars are plagued with. Basically, some water was getting into the light, and it effectively meant that the tail light wasn't working. I think it was the rear left one that had to be replaced. They've done a few of those. Later in the year, the GPS antenna was misbehaving, so it just had an update to the system, to the navigation system to make the GPS work properly. A year later in 2018, I had to have a new front right headlight. Something had happened with the bracket, and because the bracket had broken, it had to have a new headlight put in, because otherwise it was wobbling around, and when you were driving you could see it shaking, which was a little bit weird. Anyway, that was sorted out. The following year, however, July 2019 was the big one, which is when we had the paint corrosion issues. Now, I talked a lot about this at the time, but while some of the panels on the car are carbon fiber, they aren't all carbon fiber. There are still some metal panels around, and we had some oxidation, including on the wings and the bonnet. Now, the only solution to that is replacing the panels, and in fact, the car now has a full carbon fiber bonnet, which was a nice upgrade thanks to McLaren Manchester. We've got the full carbon fiber on the underside of that, but we had big issues matching the paint, and this is where I learnt the hard way that having a bespoke paint color, particularly like this, with a bespoke metallic sparkle, a pearlescent metallic in your own color of purple, which is a very difficult color to begin with, caused a nightmare in terms of matching it exactly the same. So that whole process took a very long time, which is why they kindly looked after me on the 4th year service, because effectively it had gone in 2019 for the 3rd year service, and it needed the 4th year before I collected it again in 2020, which was of course also thanks to the entire world shutting down, including businesses, dealerships, service centers, workshops, due to the situation. So a bit of two things wrapped up into one. At the end of the day though, those haven't been the worst things. There's one more little thing, which was at this 5th year service, it had the accumulators done as well because the hydraulic suspension was misbehaving slightly. But those aren't things that really add up to a huge amount. The paint, by the way, is actually covered by default by an extended warranty. That goes on even longer than the regular 3 years or the 5 years that I've had on the car. And there are a couple of other things I noted that are already slightly misbehaving. So those are noted down in the system too. Moving on from the warranty, insurance. Now, insurance is a really difficult one because insurance is different, like I said, for every person. It depends who you are, your driving record, what you do with the car, how many miles you do, where it's stored, where you are, whether you're in a city centre, whether you're outside, what the storage location is like, the security around it, what type of car it is. And it's actually a surprise in many ways because cars like this, which are driven infrequently and looked after very carefully, are actually often cheaper to insure than more normal sports cars. And this is something I've experienced before. Cars like the Supra or even the Yaris or the Focus RS are actually as expensive to insure as some of the much more standout stuff. Of course, that's not the case for cars like the GT and the Senna. They are significantly more expensive. But for me, and I'll give you the numbers, but like I said, this isn't really representative of what it would be for the next person. I've paid about £1,800 a year to insure this car. So over 5 years, I've spent about £9,000 in total on the insurance, which I don't think is too crazy. It could certainly be a lot more than that. That's the average, by the way, because obviously with the value coming down over time, that also plays a part in terms of the annual insurance premium for it. Now, the other cost that I've spent is on the storage. So when I had this car in a storage in central London, I paid approximately £3,500 a year to store it there. Now here, like I said, I don't directly pay a storage fee because it's my own barn to keep all of the cars in. If I did split it up and say this was a 15th of the barn, it would be a lot more than £3,500. So that's not really a fair way, I think, to look at it. So the long story short is over 5 years, if you take the servicing, the tyres, the brakes, the tax, the extended warranty that I paid for a period, and the insurance, I have spent £28,459 on this car to run it, which is a big number, but it's not a crazy number when you think of it as a McLaren supercar that I got to own from new. I think that could be far worse, a little bit under £6,000 a year averaged out. And of course now, not paying the warranty going forwards, I might have some surprise costs. I might get lucky and nothing goes wrong with it. And that's something that's at this stage very difficult to tell. There are other costs I know are going to be coming. There are always going to be tyre costs as those get used, and you don't want to keep the tyres for too long. So even if I don't really drive the car much going forward, at least every 5 years or so, I need to be putting new tyres on it. Brake discs are going to be a big one because I've done, I think, about 5 or 6 pretty heavy wearing track days with the car. The brake discs are getting towards the end of their life up front. If I need to replace those at dealer prices, I think it's in the region of £13,000 for a set of discs, which is obviously huge. You can get aftermarket ones, and maybe that would be the way to go, to probably halve that figure. So that could be an option that I look into. But probably one of the biggest costs, I think, just checking I haven't missed anything here at all, is what it's done in terms of depreciation. You know, while it would be a lovely dream world that a car like this would keep its value forever, unfortunately they do depreciate. This is, I guess, in the current market value, somewhere in the region of £150,000 to £200,000. It's somewhere in that bracket. So that does mean it has lost something like £150,000, which is another £30,000 a year, which rather dwarfs the £6,000 a year running costs. And of course, at this stage, I've not talked about the finance and the interest and that side of things. Again, this is completely different from one person to the next and how it's all structured. I did actually own this car outright at first. I bought it outright initially, but when I wanted to free up some capital for doing this place and some other things as well, I actually took out some finance against it, which was a great way to go about it, and a big thanks to the team at Approved for making all of that possible as well in terms of the setup. But obviously, £30,000 a year in depreciation, that's something that comes with the territory, I suppose. And if I keep this car for 20 years, it's not going to have gone down to zero, so my depreciation per year is going to significantly shrink when you average it all out. Now, I think it's an interesting one to think about. Something like the AMG GTR Roadster, that doesn't have anything like the same, you know, costs involved, let's say, as this does. But this is a proper supercar. It's one of the greatest McLarens. I actually think the value will rebound a bit more in the future as people start to appreciate how far ahead of its time this really was as a car that McLaren released onto the market. But the costs, I don't know, are they where you would have thought they were going to be? Is anything I've said a surprise? Is that all pretty much in line? I think it's interesting to run through it and to be able to share more of these details with you guys. So do let me know if there's any other car in particular that you would like to know about. But in terms of the 675LT, £28,459 over 5 years, that's all right. I think when I bought the car, it was a commitment to the long-term ownership, so not worrying too much from the depreciation side, and certainly have had plenty of enjoyment out of this over time. Anyway, again, my apologies for wearing the sunglasses indoors. My eye is nearly back to normal, but for now, I hope that's been a good one for you guys. So thank you again for watching. Until next time.